Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today I'm going to be going over my picks for the 10 worst cars to drive in GTA Online. Now the cars on this list are going to be ones that I find particularly mentally taxing to drive, and not just, you know, bad cars, but cars that just maybe don't handle well, but they have other good aspects. But some of these cars are genuinely awful, or they just have something in particular that makes them not fun to drive. At least in my opinion. Obviously you're welcome to disagree with me in the comment section down below, and I would encourage you to. Anyway guys, leave a like if you enjoy the video, dislike if you don't, and consider subscribing if you're new. Let's go ahead and get started with number 10. Now at number 10, I have the Coil Brawler. It goes for $715,000, and the Coil Brawler itself is actually a fairly decent vehicle in most aspects. However, there are two aspects of this vehicle that are actually quite terrible, especially for the seemingly good off-road capabilities of the vehicle. Now the first issue is that the vehicle is rear-wheel drive. This means that it's going to have a hard time climbing, especially steep angles, but even slightly lower angles as well as rock crawling and places where you're going to get those rear wheels high centered and off the ground, so you're not going to be able to get out of certain positions with it. And accelerating over uneven terrain is also going to be slightly problematic in the Coil Brawler. However, if you do get up to a good speed with this thing on uneven terrain or on just paved roads, regular terrain, the other issue that this vehicle has will quickly become very, very prevalent when you go to slow down and you hit the brakes. You'll notice once hitting the brakes that there are no brakes. You'll just keep going and going and going and going until you end up in the water or at the bottom of a mountain or crashed into another car or a wall or a tree. This vehicle has genuinely, honest to God, the absolute worst braking performance in all of GTA Online. And I honestly don't really understand it, but trust me, this thing is useless because of how bad the brakes are, and it's such a shame. Now it is a removed vehicle, but if it ever does come back into the game and goes to one of the dealerships where you can purchase it, I would recommend you to go and test drive this thing for yourself, especially if you're planning to buy it, to see just how bad the brakes are. I've heard that upgrading the brakes on this vehicle actually makes them worse performance-wise, but I haven't necessarily found that to make an actual difference when I've tested it. But either way, the brakes have been miserable to contend with on this thing, and I would definitely not recommend the Coil Brawler, or at the very least you should test drive it before you buy it, because these brakes, I'm telling you, are absolutely awful. Next up at number 9, we got the Fister Growler for $1,220,050 to $1,627,000 if you don't have the trade price. And the Growler is a pretty interesting car. It's manageable, but no matter how you slice it, it's also kind of disappointing. Being based off of the Porsche Cayman, in real life you'd hope that this car would have excellent handling like its real life counterpart, but sadly the Growler falls slightly short of expectations. Now I must say it's nothing compared to the disappointment of the Fister Comet S2 or the Comet S2 Cabrio, but it still has its issues with cornering in particular. Now in a straight line the car is totally fine. Customization wise, it's also awesome as well. It's a Tuner's DLC vehicle, so it's got a lot of customization, and you can also stance it to make it faster in a straight line, but this thing just cannot corner to save its life, and it doesn't have the cornering ability that it really should have in online, and that is such a shame because I love the Fister Growler. I just wish that this car could go around corners a little bit more convincingly, but by no means is it the worst ever, that's for sure. At number 8, we got the BF Raptor for $648,000, and I think this is kind of a no-brainer. A three-wheeled vehicle isn't great to drive. Who would have guessed? The BF Raptor is a car that I knew I would be disappointed by. I just didn't realize how far my disappointment would dip into the depths of hell with this car. If you enjoy understeer as well as oversteer and the inability to turn in any sort of capacity, this vehicle might be for you. And if you also hate fast acceleration, good top speed, or any sort of customization option, because there's literally not a single one outside of just what you can do on any regular car, the BF Raptor might be a car that you would want to pick up if you want all of those things. 648 grand is an absolute atrocity for this thing. Like if this was like a $40,000 vehicle, honestly, whatever. But for 650k, it is insane to purchase a BF Raptor. This thing is so terrible, and I don't know whose idea it was to add this car into GTA Online, but I hope that they don't work for Rockstar on the development of GTA 6, because I do not want to see something like this ever again, to be honest. Next up, we got the Coil Raiden for $1,375,000, and the Raiden is a fully electric four-door sports car in GTA Online that's based off of the Tesla Model S, and sadly, because it's an electric vehicle in GTA Online, it has a distinct inability to go around corners convincingly. I don't necessarily know what the issue is with electric cars in GTA Online, but nearly all of them suck when it comes to cornering, and I do understand that EVs are quite heavy, which doesn't help to make the handling any better. However, the low center of gravity that all EVs have, because the battery packs hang out in the floor, you'd think that it would at least have sort of decent handling. But unfortunately, no, it definitely doesn't. This vehicle sucks in the corners, and also despite being a full EV, it really doesn't feel that fast acceleration wise. And granted, there are a lot of really fast cars in GTA now, so our senses are probably a little bit desensitized to the speed, but the main benefit of being an EV seems to be like the fast acceleration, and this thing doesn't really seem to get that. Now, it's also all-wheel drive, which you'd again think would improve the handling, but unfortunately not so much. The only thing it really does is probably like 0 to 60 like really fast, but other than that, it's not that great. And it also doesn't have a ton of customization either, so it kind of sucks. I don't want to trash on it too hard because I know a lot of people like this thing, but I think we can all be honest, it's not as good as it should be, if we're being truthful, so that does kind of suck. Next up, we got the Grotti X80 Proto for $2,700,000, and I think a lot of you who know me at least will have probably expected this car to make the list, and here we are. And it's one of the dumbest cars in all of GTA Online history. The Proto is a stupid vehicle, and it always has been, and some people will try to cope that it's actually good somehow, or that it's really good in stunt races, but I can assure you that it isn't. I will say that the driving experience for this car isn't as horrendous as some other cars on this list. If you're just cruising around and, you know, not trying to go around as fast as possible and things like that, this car is okay. But if you do decide to race, that's where the issues on this vehicle will make themselves quite prevalent. Now, the X80 Proto's main issue, and the one that I personally find the most amusing, is the fact that this car has different traction and handling depending on the direction that you're facing on the map. You may not believe me, but this is real, I promise. For example, if you're facing north and turning right, you might have the full traction bonus that the car offers, but if you're facing south and turning right, you won't have the full traction bonus, and the car will spin out significantly easier. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what it is, but it's based on direction and turning when you're going or facing a certain direction. So it's something to keep in mind. You can look this up if you're really that curious about it. Now, the reasoning for this is due to the active aero flaps that you can see on the car adjusting themselves as you drive, which is quite cool, but it actually just doesn't work at all. Now, while I find this quite funny, the fact of having such inconsistent performance on a car that costs $2,700,000, especially coming out at a time in GTA Online where that amount of money made this vehicle like one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive vehicle in the entire game. And to top it all off, the vehicle barely has any customization. It's got like a couple spoiler options, and other than the active aero and kind of the gimmicks of the car, it gets destroyed by cars like the Zentorno, which are like a quarter of the price of the X80, which is super insane. So the X80 really sucks. It's not a fun car to race with, that's for sure. If you want to get it for cruising around for some reason, I mean, I guess, but like for 2.7 mil, you can get you could get a couple of really nice cars like a Zentorno, as well as many other vehicles as well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. The X80 Proto just isn't a great one, in my opinion at least. At number 5, we got the overflawed Entity XXR for $2,305,000. This car being on this list is going to piss a lot of people off. I'm just going to say that right now because I know, but if you'll let me explain, I think I can do a good job of it. The XXR is a car that I rushed to purchase the day that it was released into GTA Online, a new Koenigsegg GTA, like super hyped up. And when I got it, the only thing I felt felt was disappointment. And to start things off with a non-driving related topic about this car, why is it so small? Like, have you ever sat in an XXR and looked at where your legs go in first person? Because if you have, you'll see they go through the steering wheel and the dashboard of the car. And if you're wondering, if you park it next to other cars, it looks like a mouse compared to a lion. It is actually crazy how badly Rockstar scaled this car to the other cars of GTA Online. And even worse than this though is how it drives. Now, a lot of cars that were released with the Southern San Andreas Super Sport Series DLC have the same issue as this thing, and the issue is something called engine resistance. It essentially makes a car that would otherwise be great and takes it so that it slows it down to a crawl. And the mechanic works by slowing down shift times by a significant amount. So when you get to the red line and when the car should shift, it'll just sit there for like 5-10 seconds, and it'll do this at every single shift point. And eventually it won't let you into the top gear of the vehicle, which is super annoying, and it completely stunts the acceleration and top speed of all of the vehicles affected by this. Another one that's affected by this is the Vapid Ellie, another one is the Dinka Jester Classic. So those cars are really negatively affected by this. Now, Rockstar has gone to rectify this a little bit, and they made it a little tiny bit better, but it's not fully better by any means. And the unfortunate part is that Rockstar copied the code from the Entity XXR onto the overflawed Entity MT, so it has the exact same issue. It's got engine resistance and it's way slower than it should be. I really wish they'd go back and just completely remove this mechanic from these vehicles, but I don't think it'll ever happen, sadly. At number 4, we got the Declasse Vamos for $596,000, and the Vamos is a car that I truly really want to love, but I just can't because of how it drives. The best way of describing what this car is like when you're driving it is if you imagine the front wheels having 1 inch of tire touching the road, and the faster you go, the less tire touching the road you have. So instead of having like 10-inch tires on the front, or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever inch tires, you have like 1 inch of the tire touching the road. And when you get up to like 105 miles per hour, it's like you got like a 1/4 inch touching the road to steer the car. And this results in this thing spinning out like crazy when you're going straight, which seems really kind of counterintuitive because it's a muscle car and they're not really known for their handling. But oddly enough, this thing has trouble going in a straight line and actually has pretty good handling. So it's really weird. The only thing is with this car though is when you hit a corner at speed, the vehicle does feel the absolute necessity to roll over onto its roof, which is quite annoying as well, and that's also a result of advanced handling flags that this car has a ton of. This vehicle could have been so great, but those advanced handling flags sadly have kind of ruined it in my opinion. It's still a nice car to look at, it's a nice garage piece, but to drive it is just not a great time. Next up we got the Pegassi Tesseract for $2,825,000, and I've had a long history of absolutely hating the Pegassi Tesseract on YouTube, and that will not be stopping today. I maintain that this is probably the absolute worst supercar in GTA Online, especially when you consider the cost that it is for the performance that you're going to get in return. It cannot go around corners at any degree of speed, especially if there's any sort of throttle input as well. No matter what you do, even with a spoiler and a neon kit on the car, the handling is completely dreadful, and it also looks horrific in my opinion. I'm simply not a fan of these super futuristic looking vehicles. It's also kind of why I don't love the X80 as well, but that is besides the point. There's probably going to be some people coping and doing mental gymnastics in the comments on this video about how this vehicle is actually good, bro, because it's not affected by catch-up in races, which slows down the person in first place so that the other people can hopefully catch up. But yeah, you're never going to get in first place with this vehicle to begin with. At least it is extremely unlikely. The customization is also not very great on top of it all, and there's not even an engine sound to listen to while you spin out repeatedly. So in my opinion, this thing just is not that good. Vista Comet S2 up next at number 2 for $1,408,500 to $1,878,000 if you don't have the trade price. This is a car that has disappointed me so greatly that I often forget just how bad it is. And we used this in a manhunt recently as a hunter vehicle, and it all instantly came rushing back to me. This vehicle is absolutely horrendous. For a vehicle based off of a Porsche 911 with upgrades that can make it look like any range of model in the 911 family, This vehicle is absolutely nothing like a Porsche 911. Typically, Porsches are regarded as some of the best handling cars of all time, and in-game this thing can barely take a corner, especially at any degree of speed or if you have a slight throttle input as well. The oversteer that this car suffers is absolutely insane. It feels like it has those plastic wheels that you'll find on children's ride-on toys for tires. Zero grip, it is very disappointing. And I absolutely want to love this car because I love how it looks. I think it's very fun to customize. The customization is also super plentiful. There's a bunch of stuff you can do to it. And in a straight line, it's super fast, but the handling is simply something I cannot get past with this vehicle, and it's so unfortunate, but it's just not that good. Now for a dishonorable mention, I've got the Lampadati Michelli GT for $1,225,000, and the Michelli GT isn't necessarily the worst car ever, mostly because I didn't expect it to be exceptionally good, and that's why I got the dishonorable mention on this list. This vehicle is intended to be a rally car, and in some ways it's actually really good at being one. However, if you're not rallying, this vehicle's handling in particular can be very inconsistent and jumpy feeling. I believe this car likely has advanced handling flags similar to the Declassi Vamos that we talked about a little bit earlier in the list, and if that's the case, I don't really blame the car for it too much. The same way I don't really blame the Vamos, but it's just a reality that these cars are not that good, if that is the case. It's also quite slow, and paired with the wonky handling, it's just not really a great driving experience in my opinion, and for the money, it's just way too expensive. At number 1, we have a car that in theory should be really good, and in fact, some of you guys might actually think this car is very good, and it's the Coil Cyclone 2 for $2,250,000. This thing has the most horrendous torque steer with the HSW upgrades applied to it, but even without them on the car, the driving experience on this thing isn't exactly wonderful. It kind of feels like the Ocelot Virtue in the corners, which isn't a good thing. You'd hope that for spending your hard-earned $2,250,000, you'd get a car that was exceptionally good, but unfortunately, that's only really the case when it comes to straight line performance with the Coil Cyclone 2, because this thing cannot corner very well. You'll be in a corner, a little bit of throttle maybe not even, and all of a sudden you'll spin out. Or you get around the corner and you start going straight again and you hit the gas all the way and all of a sudden you're spinning out because your wheels were slightly tilted to one side or the other. The Coil Cyclone 2 just sends way too much power to the front wheels, I think, and that seems to be the number one problem with this car. It torque steers and it will just steer you out of where you're wanting it to go just because of the power that the car has. So it's pretty crazy, but I do not find the Coil Cyclone 2 to be a good driving experience whatsoever. Anyway guys, there you have it. Those are my picks for the 10 worst cars to drive in GTA Online. Let me know your thought on my list in the comment section down below. As I said at the start of the video, if you disagree with me, let me know why and what vehicles you disagree with in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, dislike if you didn't of course, and consider subscribing to my channel if you guys are new. With that being said, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care. Peace.